Alien crew sends a distress call, and an elite human fighter pilot answers, HFY Story Sci-Fi HFY. The alien research vessel drifted slowly at the edge of a broken star system. Its hull was scarred, its lights dim, and its engines silent. Inside, the crew moved with quiet fear. They had done everything they could, and it was not enough. Captain Threx stood in the command chamber, his four eyes fixed on the main display. Red warning symbols covered it. Power was low. Life support was failing in 2 sections. Weapons were gone. Engines were damaged beyond repair. Around them, space felt heavy and hostile, as if it was waiting for them to stop breathing. This system was forbidden space. Long ago, ancient records warned of predators that lived between gravity tides and radiation storms. No sane ship traveled here. But curiosity and duty had brought the research vessel in, and now that same curiosity was going to kill them. A low alarm sounded. One of the sensors had picked up movement again. "They are still circling," said the navigation officer, his voice shaking. 3 large contacts. Possibly more hiding behind the debris field. Threx closed his eyes for a moment. The creatures out there were not alive in the way most species understood life. They were part machine, part something older. They hunted damaged ships. They waited. They learned. "How long?" Threx asked. "Less than 1 cycle," the officer replied. "Maybe minutes." Silence filled the chamber. The crew knew what that meant. Threx turned slowly. "Prepare the distress call." A few heads lifted in surprise. Distress calls in this region were useless. No one listened here. No one answered. The signal would take time to travel, and even if someone heard it, no ship would come into this system willingly. Still, the communication officer obeyed. "Open channel," she said softly. "Encoding old standard, wide broadcast." Threx nodded. "Send it." The message was short. No speeches. No hope, just coordinates, status, and a warning. "This is a research vessel of the Coalition. Engines disabled. Hostile entities present. Any receiving ship, do not enter this system unless prepared for combat." The signal left the ship and vanished into the dark. The crew waited. Nothing happened. Minutes passed. The hostile contacts moved closer. One appeared briefly on the outer camera feed, a massive shape sliding through broken metal and glowing dust. It did not rush. It did not need to. "We should shut down non-essential systems," someone whispered. "Save power." Threx nodded again. "Do it." Lights dimmed further. The ship felt colder. Then the communication panel made a sound it had not made since the distress call was sent. A single tone. A reply indicator. The officer froze. "Captain, we're receiving something." Threx stepped forward quickly. "From where?" The officer checked the data, confusion spreading across her face. "It's a response. Very close, already inside the system." The chamber erupted in quiet disbelief. "That's impossible," the navigation officer said. "No one jumps into this system without days of planning." The signal strengthened. The translation system struggled, then locked on. "This is Human Patrol Fighter Echo 7, a calm voice said. "Distress call received. I am inbound." The chamber fell completely silent. "Human," Threx said slowly. They knew that word. Every species did. Humans were new compared to the old empires, but their reputation traveled fast. They were aggressive, stubborn, and dangerously adaptable. They built ships that pushed physics too hard. They sent pilots alone where fleets would hesitate. But they were also rare in coalition space. Most species avoided them. Humans did not always follow shared logic. "Confirm sender identity," Threx ordered. The officer's fingers moved quickly. "Single craft, fighter class, no escort, no support signatures." "One ship," someone whispered. "That pilot is insane," another said. The human voice returned. "Coalition vessel, your signal was weak. I'm about 2 minutes out. Transmit threat data." Threx hesitated only a moment. "Send everything," he said, "and warn him." The channel opened fully. "Human pilot, this system is extremely dangerous. Hostile entities beyond standard combat classification are present. We advise retreat. There was a short pause. Understood, the human replied. Still coming. The main display shifted as a new contact appeared, small, fast, moving at a speed that made the navigation officer gasp. He's not slowing down, the officer said. Captain, he's accelerating. The fighter tore out of hyperspace like a weapon being fired. Space warped around it. Radiation flared. Debris scattered as the ship screamed past broken moons and twisted metal. The human craft was nothing like coalition fighters. It was compact, angular, and clearly built for speed. Its engines burned hot and bright, pushing limits no alien pilot would dare touch. Threx felt something unfamiliar tighten in his chest. Not hope, not relief, fear. The hostile entities reacted instantly. 3 massive shapes turned toward the incoming fighter. Energy signatures spiked. They moved to intercept. Human pilot, Threx said urgently, they are targeting you, evade immediately. The reply came without panic. Already on it. The fighter twisted sharply, dodging the first attack by a distance so small the sensors struggled to measure it. A blast passed where the ship had been less than a second before. The alien crew stared. No living pilot should survive that turn, the navigation officer said. The human ship did not slow. It dove deeper into the danger zone, drawing the enemies away from the crippled vessel. Why is he doing this? The communication officer whispered. He doesn't know us. Threx watched the fighter move like a blade through darkness. Humans answer calls, he said quietly, even foolish ones. The human voice came back on the channel, still calm. Coalition vessel, I'm going to keep them busy. Reroute whatever power you have left to engines and shields. You're getting out of here. We cannot, Threx replied. Our engines will work long enough, the pilot interrupted. They always do. Another attack flared. The fighter rolled, sparks flying from its hull. Warning signals burst across the human ship's outline, visible even on coalition sensors. He's taking damage, someone said. Yes, Threx replied, and he is still fighting. The hostile entities followed the human deeper into the system, exactly as the pilot wanted. For the first time since the attack began, the pressure on the alien ship eased. Threx straightened. Engineering, he said firmly. Do what he says. Give me anything that can move this ship. As the crew rushed to obey, Threx kept his eyes on the small human fighter, dancing between monsters that should have crushed it instantly. For the first time since the distress call was sent, the alien captain allowed himself a dangerous thought. Maybe the call had been answered for a reason. The human fighter moved like it did not fear death. It cut through broken space with sharp turns and sudden bursts of speed that made alien sensors struggle to keep up. Every movement looked wrong to the coalition crew watching from their damaged ship. No safety margins, no smooth arcs, only violent motion and perfect control. The hostile entities followed. 3 of them chased the human, their massive forms tearing through debris and radiation clouds. They fired again and again, long beams of energy that bent space and shattered old wrecks. The fighter dodged most of it. When it could not dodge, it took the hit and kept flying. Inside the coalition vessel, Captain Threx stood silently as alarms screamed through his ship. Engineers shouted status reports. Power was being forced into systems that had already failed once. The human pilot's confidence felt unreal, but it gave the crew something they had lost: time. The enemies are fully focused on the human, the sensor officer said. They are ignoring us, Threx nodded. Then we will not waste that gift. In engineering, sparks flew as systems were bypassed and safety limits ignored. The engines hummed weakly, then stronger. The ship trembled like a wounded animal trying to stand. We have partial thrust, the chief engineer said. Not enough for a jump, but enough to move. Then move, Threx replied, slowly, quietly. Outside, the human fighter suddenly reversed direction, cutting straight toward the largest hostile entity. The alien crew gasped as one. "He's attacking it head-on," the navigation officer said. "That makes no sense." The fighter opened fire, not with heavy weapons but with rapid, precise shots aimed at joints, energy nodes, and weak points the coalition databases barely understood. The human had studied the threat data in seconds and adapted instantly. The hostile entity recoiled. It did not retreat, but it hesitated. That hesitation cost it. The fighter flew straight through a narrow gap between floating wreckage and a gravity ripple, forcing the massive enemy to follow. The larger creature clipped the debris, its movement slowing just enough. The human pilot spoke again, breathing steady. "Coalition vessel, status check." "We are moving," Threx replied. "Your actions are effective." The pilot let out a short breath that might have been a laugh. "Good, keep going." The other two hostile entities split, trying to surround the fighter. The human responded by diving toward a radiation storm near the system's core. "He's heading into lethal radiation," the sensor officer warned. "No shields can." "Human shields can," Threx said quietly, though he was not certain why he believed that. The fighter entered the storm. Energy flared across its hull. Systems flickered, but the ship did not break apart. The enemy slowed at the edge, unwilling or unable to follow fully. The human used that moment. He turned inside the storm, weapons firing blind, trusting his instruments and instincts. One hostile entity took a direct hit to a critical structure and howled through space in a way that made alien crew members recoil. It pulled back, damaged but not destroyed. The human fighter emerged from the radiation, smoking but alive. "He should be dead," someone whispered. "Yes," Threx replied, "but he is not." The enemies regrouped. They learned. Their attacks became more coordinated, more dangerous. One shot struck the human fighter hard, tearing open part of its hull. Debris scattered into space. "Human pilot, you are heavily damaged," Threx said urgently. "You must retreat." The reply came after a brief pause. The voice was still calm but tighter. "Can't. If I pull back now, they'll notice you." The coalition ship continued its slow escape, engines straining. Every second mattered. The human pilot adjusted his tactics. He stopped running. Instead, he began to control the battlefield. He used wreckage as cover, gravity wells as weapons, and timing as a blade. Each move forced the hostile entities to react instead of plan. The alien crew watched in stunned silence as the human fought not like a warrior, but like a hunter who had decided the monsters were his prey. Another hit landed. Warning signals flared on the human ship's display feed. Life support dipped, then stabilized. "He is pushing beyond safe limits," the medical officer said. "No pilot should endure that stress." Threx watched the fighter roll and fire again. "Humans redefine safe," he said. At last, the coalition engines reached a critical threshold. "Captain," the engineer called. "We can attempt a short jump. It will be unstable." Threx looked at the human fighter, still dancing between enemies. "If we jump now, they may redirect." Before he could decide, the human pilot spoke again. "Coalition vessel, I need you gone. I'm running out of ship." There was no fear in the voice, only fact. Threx made his choice. "Prepare jump," he ordered. "On my mark." The hostile entities sensed the change. One broke away from the human and turned toward the coalition ship, accelerating fast. The human reacted instantly. He burned everything his engines had left, slamming into the enemy's path and opening fire at point-blank range. The impact shook space itself. The enemy recoiled, damaged badly, but the human fighter was thrown spinning. "Human pilot!" Threx shouted. The reply was delayed. Static filled the channel. Then the voice returned, strained but alive. "Still here. Jump, now." Threx did not hesitate. "Execute jump." The coalition ship tore itself out of normal space in a violent flash. Alarms screamed as reality twisted, but the ship survived. For a long moment there was only silence. Then they were gone. The stars outside were calm, safe space. Inside the ship, the crew collapsed into seats and against walls. Some cried, Some laughed weakly, some simply stared. Threx stood alone, staring at the empty space where the human fighter had been. "He saved us," the communication officer said softly. "He stayed behind." Threx closed his eyes. "Yes." They transmitted a final message, a simple one, back toward the deadly system. Human pilot Echo 7. "We have escaped. Thank you." No reply came. The coalition ship moved on, carrying survivors, data, and a story that would change how the galaxy spoke of humans. Behind them in the Forbidden System, a single damaged human fighter still fought in the dark, refusing to let the enemy chase those who had been saved. The human fighter drifted through the broken system, engines coughing, hull torn open in several places. Fire no longer burned. There was no air left to feed it. What remained was silence, broken only by alarms inside the cockpit. The pilot breathed slowly through his mask. Each breath felt heavier than the last. Warning lights filled his vision, but he ignored most of them. He had learned long ago that not every warning mattered. Some only told you what you already knew. The enemies were still there. 3 hostile entities remained active. One was damaged badly, moving slower than before. The others had learned from the fight. They kept their distance now. They circled, they waited. The human pilot checked his remaining systems. Weapons were limited, shields were almost gone, engines were unstable but still alive. Life support was holding by a thin margin. "Okay," he said quietly to himself. Still breathing, still flying. Human pilots were trained for moments like this. Not the manuals or simulations, but the understanding that things would break, that plans would fail. That survival depended on thinking clearly when everything screamed that it was over. The enemies moved closer. They were not angry, they were not emotional. They were predators that had adapted over thousands of encounters. They tested. They probed. They wanted to know how dangerous the human still was. The pilot let his fighter drift, pretending weakness. Power levels dropped. Engine output fell. He made himself look like prey. It worked. The most damaged entity moved in first, slow but determined. It fired a probing attack, not strong enough to kill, but enough to force a reaction. The human reacted exactly as expected. He dodged late, too late. The attack clipped his ship, tearing away more armor and sending the fighter spinning. Alarms screamed louder. The enemies adjusted their movement, confidence rising. Inside the cockpit, the pilot smiled. As the ship spun, he cut all non-essential power and dumped stored energy into one remaining weapon system. He waited for the exact moment when the enemy was closest. Then he fired. The shot was not powerful, but it was precise. It struck a weakened internal structure the pilot had noticed earlier. The hostile entity shuddered, its energy pattern collapsing inward. For the first time, one of them died. It did not explode. It simply came apart, its pieces drifting silently into the void. The other 2 pulled back instantly. The human fighter stabilized barely. The pilot coughed, his breath sharp and painful now. "One down," he whispered. "Still not done." The enemies changed tactics. They stopped attacking directly. Instead, they began manipulating the environment. Debris fields shifted. Gravity tides changed. Radiation levels spiked. They were trying to trap him. The pilot checked his navigation display and frowned. The system's core was ahead. A massive gravity well surrounded by unstable energy. No ship should fly close to it. No ship except one with no better options. He set a course straight toward the core. The enemies followed, cautious but unwilling to let him escape. They stayed at range, herding him forward. The human fighter flew deeper into danger. Radiation burned across its hull. Systems failed one by one. The cockpit lights dimmed until only emergency red remained. The pilot's hands shook, not from fear but from exhaustion. He forced them steady. "Come on," he muttered. "Just a little more." Inside the gravity well, physics became unreliable. Sensors lied, distances stretched and snapped back. Time itself felt wrong. The enemies slowed. Their movements became less certain. This was their weakness. The pilot shut down his engines completely and let the gravity pull him in. The fighter fell like a stone. The enemies hesitated. One followed too closely. At the last possible moment, the pilot fired his maneuvering thrusters at full power, slingshotting his ship sideways with brutal force. The sudden change tore at the fighter, but it held. The enemy did not. It was pulled too deep. Its structure warped. Energy fields collapsed under forces it could not escape. In seconds, it was crushed and torn apart by the system itself. Only one hostile entity remained. The pilot's ship was nearly dead now. Engines flickered. Life support failed briefly, then returned. The cockpit grew cold. The last enemy watched from a distance. It did not attack. It waited. The pilot understood. It was patient. It believed time was on its side. It was wrong. The human pilot opened a narrow communication channel, broadcasting on all frequencies, not words, data, combat recordings, sensor logs, weapon impact analysis, everything he had learned about these enemies during the fight. He sent it out into space, riding radiation waves and gravity distortions, spreading far beyond the system. If he did not survive, others would. The enemy noticed the transmission. It moved to stop him. The pilot had one weapon left, not a missile, not a gun, his ship. He set a collision course directly toward the hostile entity and armed the fighter's core. Overload warnings filled the cockpit. The enemy fired, trying to disable him before he reached it. The shots tore into the fighter. Systems failed completely. The pilot's display went dark. He flew blind. Using only instinct and memory, he held course. At the last second, the enemy tried to evade. The human pilot smiled, blood on his lips. "Too late," he whispered. The fighter slammed into the hostile entity and detonated its core. The explosion lit the system like a newborn star. Energy ripped through space, tearing apart debris, radiation, and the last enemy alike. Silence followed. Far away, the coalition ship emerged from its unstable jump, damaged but alive. The crew worked desperately to stabilize systems and tend to the wounded. Captain Threx stood on the bridge, staring at long-range sensors. "Any signal?" he asked quietly. The sensor officer shook his head. "No, the system is quiet." Threx closed his eyes. He had known this moment would come. The data transmission arrived hours later. A flood of information poured into the ship's computers. Combat logs, enemy weaknesses, human tactical analysis. And at the end, a short message: Echo 7, mission complete, hostiles neutralized. If you're reading this, tell them we held the line. Silence filled the bridge. "He did it," the communication officer whispered. "He stopped them." "Yes," Threx replied, "he did." The crew stood together, united by the knowledge that one human pilot had faced the darkness alone and won, not for glory, not for reward, but because someone had asked for help. They believed he was gone. They believed his story was finished. They were wrong. The explosion faded and silence returned to the forbidden system. Broken debris drifted slowly, glowing faintly as energy bled away into the dark. For a long time, nothing moved. Then something small twitched. A piece of wreckage shifted, pushed by a weak burst of gas. Beneath twisted metal and shattered armor, a shape separated itself from the debris cloud. It was barely recognizable as a ship. Most of its hull was gone. One wing was missing. Engines were dark, but it was still there. Inside what remained of the cockpit, the human pilot floated unconscious, held in place by damaged restraints. Emergency systems, simple and stubborn, had done their job. The fighter's core had detonated outward, not inward, throwing the pilot's compartment clear at the last possible moment. Minutes passed, then hours. A single light flickered on inside the cockpit. The pilot coughed. Pain came back slowly, like a wave rolling in. His chest hurt. His head felt heavy. Every breath tasted of metal and cold air. He forced his eyes open and immediately wished he had not. The displays were mostly dead. One screen glowed weakly, showing life support at critical but stable. Power was almost gone. Engines were completely offline. "Still breathing," he whispered. His voice sounded strange in the small space. He tried to move his hands. One responded. The other did not. He gritted his teeth and focused on staying awake. Humans were taught one rule above all others in deep space survival: if you are alive, you are not finished. He checked external sensors. Nothing hostile remained. The system was quiet, too quiet. The pilot let his head rest back for a moment. He had done what he came to do. The coalition ship was gone. The threat was gone. If this was the end, he accepted it. But humans rarely accepted endings without a fight. Using the last of the emergency power, he triggered a beacon. Not a loud distress call, just a tight, coded signal designed for human ears only. It pulsed once, then again, riding the same radiation and gravity waves he had used before. Then the power failed completely. The cockpit went dark. Far away, in safe coalition space, Captain Threx stood before a council of alien leaders. The chamber was filled with beings of many shapes and colors. Screens displayed data from the Forbidden System, now marked as cleared. Threx spoke calmly, but his voice carried weight. "One human fighter pilot answered our distress call," he said. "One. He engaged enemies that entire fleets avoided. He saved my crew. He neutralized the threat." Murmurs spread through the chamber. "And he is dead?" one council member asked. Threx paused. "We believed so." The combat data had already spread across the coalition. Analysts studied it with disbelief. Human tactics, human ship design, human tolerance for damage and risk. Entire doctrines were being questioned. Before the council could respond, an alert sounded. A new signal appeared on the display. "Human origin, rescue fleet inbound." The chamber fell silent. Threx stared at the data, his heart's beating faster. "Source?" he asked. "Long-range beacon," the technician replied. "Faint but verified, originating from the Forbidden System." A human commander appeared on the screen. Her expression was serious, focused. "This is Commander Hale of the Human Search and Recovery Corps," she said. "We received a pilot beacon. Echo 7, we're going in." The council erupted in shock. "That system is lethal," one leader protested. "You cannot." "We can," Hale replied evenly. "And we will." The transmission ended. Back in the Forbidden System, the broken cockpit drifted slowly, tumbling through the dark. The pilot floated in and out of awareness, his thoughts blurred. Then something changed. A vibration. Faint, distant, but real. His eyes opened again. Light appeared outside the cracked viewport, not hostile, controlled, human. A massive shape emerged from hyperspace, followed by several smaller craft, rescue ships, heavy armor, bright engines. The pilot laughed weakly, then winced. "Took you long enough," he whispered. Cutting beams sliced carefully through debris. Gentle forces stabilized the cockpit. A human rescue team moved with trained precision, sealing breaches, restoring power, flooding the space with warm air. The pilot felt hands on his shoulders, heard voices through the fog. "Got you, Echo 7. Easy, you're safe." He smiled before darkness took him again. When he woke, the light was soft and steady. Medical equipment hummed quietly around him. He felt heavy, sore, but alive. A human medic noticed his eyes open and leaned in. "Welcome back," she said. "You scared a lot of people." "Did it work?" the pilot asked. She smiled. "Yeah, it worked." Days later, the human task force secured the Forbidden System completely. The remaining debris of the hostile entities was destroyed or contained. Navigation warnings were lifted, trade routes shifted. The galaxy noticed. News spread fast among the stars. A distress call answered by one human fighter, a pilot who fought alone. A system cleared. An impossible survival. The coalition formally reclassified humanity, not as reckless, not as unstable, but as dependable beyond reason. Captain Threx stood aboard his repaired ship, watching human vessels move with confidence and purpose. When he was invited onto a human flagship, he accepted without hesitation. He met the pilot days later. Echo 7 stood a little stiff, still healing but upright. His uniform was simple, no grand symbols, no visible pride. Threx bowed his head. "You saved my crew," he said. "You saved more than that." The pilot shrugged slightly. "You sent a call," he replied. "That's what matters." Threx studied him. "Your people came for you without hesitation, even knowing the danger." The pilot smiled faintly. "That's what we do too." The story spread far beyond the coalition, among traders, soldiers, explorers, and civilians. It became a rule whispered in dangerous places: if you are lost, if you are hunted, if the dark is closing in, send the call, because if a human answers, they will come. Not because they are fearless, but because someone asked.